that we'll move to Malik's response. So we talked about how Malaysian society has progressed so much. We are educated, we have access to information on the internet, and so on. And so that gives us a sort of positive feel that, yay, we're riding the wave, this is the change. But the question on all of our minds is that, is this really a change that's going to hit the rest of the country? Because we know that internet access is only available within the more urban areas of the country. Is it more dominant amongst the Chinese and Indian non-Malay areas of society? And if so, is this change that we are feeling amongst ourselves because we are caught in this society as well? I mean, in this community in particular, is it something realistic? Yeah.
Very briefly, I agree that we should not over-exaggerate the influence of the internet, because a lot of the people who are talking about how powerful the internet is, they happen to write for internet magazines and computer magazines. They will sell your computers to you. Yeah. I'm going to Kelantan, and Kelantan really it's door to door. Yeah, it's door to door. It's door to door, and the old modes of organization still apply. What the internet can do is, I think, disseminate information which is passed from door to door, and I think there is where the internet is powerful. But let's also remember one thing. The internet and immediate communications of that nature, this is a double-edged sword. It cuts both ways. It cuts both ways because the internet also gives protection for those who want to be secluded from pluralism. Let me put it this way, in a very blunt way. Yeah. Say you live in a mixed neighborhood, and you don't like your neighbors because one's having barbecued pork in his house, and the other one's keeping a dog, and you don't want to talk to your neighbors. But you've got the internet, so you can talk to your friend on the other side of town. So the internet allows you to bypass your immediate fellow Malaysians next to you. And that's why when we look at the internet, let's remember, not all bloggers, that's why sometimes I get a bit annoyed when people talk about, that's for bloggers. There are some fascist, racist, sectarian bloggers out there as well. And a lot of the nastiness that is coming out now in the lead-up of the election, this is being disseminated in parallel cyberspace networks, communitarian voices, Hindu chauvinists, Muslim chauvinists, Christian chauvinists, who basically hate everybody else but only want to talk to their own. And the internet allows you to do that. The internet allows you to do that. So that's why the internet is part of the public domain. But the real public domain is something like this, is where we confront each other face to face, and we need to expand and defend this public domain above all else. The internet can help us, but don't think that it is, by definition, essentially a benevolent tool. It's not. Because I've watched the rise of, fascism and Nazism in Germany, and that was an internet phenomenon as well.
Thank you.
Nothing, everyone. There are always two problems that come up when you speak after Farish now. The first is, what do you say to follow up? And the second is, he always wants to make you migrate immediately. I'm wondering whether I can get out of the country fast enough. Now, I think when we talk of communitarian, sectarian positioning, I think the temptation is to fall into the belief that this is something that the leadership is inspiring, that on the ground there's no following. And so I'm going to speak about that a little bit to sort of set off some of what Farish is saying. I agree entirely with what Farish is presenting, with one caveat that, when we speak of field research, to what extent is that field research necessary to fill a different position? And so while he can speak of certain experiences he's had, I can speak of experiences on the other side. So for example, when we say Malays do not support the Indra cause, mistaking it to be a religious extremist position, making them defensive. I can speak of a situation where 700 paddy farmers said, well, they understand the marginalization that Indra is speaking of, and they can relate to it. So there are two sides to this. But the idea that this is necessarily just contained to leadership, and therefore on the ground, if we were to band together as civil society and start pushing a pluralist position, is the panacea for everything, I think that's something we have to be a little bit careful about. It's something that we should look at, and we should look at developing and pushing very, very aggressively, but fall into the belief that the solution is merely responding to leadership without regard to what the community itself is speaking about or thinking is a slightly dangerous thing. So to follow up Farish, I usually just tell funny stories because I think that's the safest way in which I can preserve my self-respect. So it's quite funny because in 2006, when some of you may have seen that poster asking for my dad, the immediate reaction was, thank God they used a really good photo. Really bad photos. There are thousands of these things. And that was actually put out by an extremist, what I would call an extremist group, using the internet media, which is something what Farish was speaking about. And thousands of that went out. Now, I spoke to Farish at that point in time, and I said, I'm pretty proud because, in 2006 I was 36, and I didn't have to write a book condemning the Prophet or insulting the religion in any way for me to get a fatwa against me. So I thought that was pretty good. And I said, as the youngest religion ever to be fatwa'd in this way, I'd like to speak from this position of honor. And Farish reminded me that he'd actually been fatwa'd much younger. And even that he took away from me. So my point in describing that situation is to just say that that was a poster that came out of civil society on the other side. So when we speak of civil society, and with all this blogging and with this Barisan Rakyat, it's very, very tempting to say, rah, we're on the way to a better Malaysia. And I'd like to believe it. I've written about a better Malaysia in my blog as well. I'm just saying you've got to accept that on the other side, there is this situation. So will race politics dominate the elections? Of course it will. Nothing's changed the mindset of certain communities on the ground in such a radical way that we're going to see a massive swing. And Farish has already spoken about this. But will there be a significant shift on the part of perhaps the urban voters? I think there will be. And I'd like to speak a little bit about the Barisan Rakyat Initiative, not to tell you about what it is, although I will make mention of it a little bit, but to actually tell you how that came to be. Now, I've been involved in the group that has been working on the Barisan Rakyat over the last 2 years, and Trisha was right, it's been spearheaded primarily by individuals like Haris Ibrahim. Now, the People's Parliament, I think, was the first real indication of what we had as a civil society response. The initiative, if you remember, was actually aimed at trying to organize certain cells, to use the language of counterterrorism, certain cells within particular constituencies to start challenging incumbents, to start challenging positions by reference to certain themes. So for about 1 year, the People's Parliament spearheaded this initiative, I think within 20 constituencies, to try and get people in those constituencies to start deciding what was important and what was not. Now what's interesting is, out of those constituencies that proved to be a success, and there were some, not all, but some, they began to arrange themselves around certain core themes that all of us find significant to us. Religious freedom was one of the things. Islamic State was another thing. Accountability on the part of government or the elected representative was another thing. And tied in with all of that was, of course, to what extent was the person voted into office in a position to readily admit at this stage that he or she would, if necessary, stand against party politics. Now, it created a pretty interesting situation. PJ Uttara, PJ Selatan, there were meetings with the reps to try and see to what extent there was, and the idea was to use that information to then convince voters how to position themselves. Now, the People's Parliament proved to be very, very successful. Very meaning in a relative sense, of course, in the limited context of Malaysia, in the limited sense of freedom that we have, and I'm just reminded of the speech by Dr. Mahathir at the Perdana Foundation event earlier this year, where he said, good on you bloggers, I'm glad you're willing to take the risk. So even he's saying, the risk that he put in place a few years ago is still prevalent. And they are still talking about the ISA. And over the last quarter, we did hear a lot about the ISA being used against people who were actively promoting particular views through the blogs, right? But to put that into perspective, we have the People's Parliament Initiative. Now that developed slowly into an idea that, it's very tempting to say we reject the government because the government's all wrong. But what about those people in the government who are actually pretty decent people? And there are those people as well. I mean, to be too simplistic to say that no one in the Barisan is of any use. All right? There are some, not many, but there are some. And in the same vein, I could say that just because you're an opposition member doesn't mean you should get my support. Because I was asked to stand for the elections, and I said no because I don't identify with any of the opposition parties at this point for my personal reasons. So when we were faced with that sort of choice, some of us thought that, what about, positioning ourselves as independents, forcing a compromise? So that was something that began developing, maybe a bit late in the day, and with a little bit more time that might have achieved a certain momentum that could have taken us through. Tony Kasim was willing to run, but then she's withdrawn for health reasons. And we have other individuals who are prepared to run as independents, suddenly realizing that with the shortness of time, they would not have enough